Welcome, Dead Elephants podcast.
Welcome.
We have gone from just a smaller group of people to a much, much larger
We're
group.
creating a movement. First followers.
The bar for movement these days is very low, Chris.
No, we're there.
All right, so Chris, why don't you take it away with what we're doing today, who we've got in the room.
Well, in the vein of what we've been doing in season 2 with the docuseries kind of format, this is one that when I say excited, not because it's going to be an easy conversation, but because it's going to be a very important conversation. So part of what we're wanting to do on this podcast is discuss taboo things that may not get be spoken about from the pulpit, and today is certainly one of those. So this episode and the 2 following will form a 3-part series on all things fertility, IVF, miscarriage, stillbirth, rainbow babies. What happens when the process of becoming a parent doesn't follow the textbook? And the reason I'm wanting to do this is when I stepped into pastoral ministry, I had no idea how common these stories were, number one, and number two, the emotional toll that they took. So I'm very happy to say that our process of fertility, pregnancy was relatively straightforward. We had a few things around delivery, but this is not a shared experience that I have. And I'm also happy to say that I had misjudged, particularly in the context of miscarriage. Let's say a miscarriage in the first 12 weeks, which is normally where it resides, but not always, and we'll hear more of that today. I had assumed it was, that's a shame, we'll just move on and try again. Now, I'd consider myself fairly pastorally sensitive, but I missed that one completely. I'd assumed it was like a set and forget, no big deal, it happens. But the emotional grief that I saw time and time again made me realise, this is a much bigger deal for people than what I'd thought. So that's what we're doing over the next 3 episodes, and we have 3 very special guests with us, hence Duncan's comment about getting bigger. We have Phoebe. Say hello, Phoebe.
Morning, hi.
Good
Phoebe.
Morning. We have Jenna.
Hello.
And apparently Jenna has a private school accent that we'll suss out as time goes on.
Okay.
I've also said for a long time Jenna has a great radio voice, so we're gonna test that.
Let's hope we don't let everybody down.
And we have Holly.
Morning.
Now, each of these women have different parts of their story. There is some overlap here, but between these 3 very special women who are all my friends, we have lived experience of fertility issues, we have lived experience of miscarriage, and we have lived experience of stillbirth. And all of those things coming together therefore means that we've got lived experience of what we've come to know that Phoebe introduced me to, the concept of rainbow babies. As a parent, how do you process welcoming a baby after you've lost another baby and the emotional journey that is unto itself? So that's where we're going over the next 3 episodes. I hope it's helpful for our listeners. I hope it helps to unstigmatize something that is very common for people. And I just want to say thank you for our guests for being open about sharing some of their stories. So that's where we're going, brother.
All right, sounds good. So where do you want to start things off, mate?
Well, I think let's just hear a little bit of each lady's stories for this first episode. Not just about this topic, but who they are, who's in their family, and maybe just a dovetail into how their journey touches on a particular part of this. And then this episode will focus more in on Holly, because of the 3 women, Holly's story involves infertility issues, whereas the other ladies' stories come in different ways as the episodes go on. So let's just start with a get to know you for our listeners. Phoebe, let's start with you. Anything you want to share, both personally and also how your story intersects with this topic?
So, hi, Phoebe. I have had 4 children. My first daughter, Scarlett, she was stillborn at 29 weeks. That was 2018. And then we have since had 3 subsequent children. Verity is 4, Caspian is 2, and Simeon is 7 months.
Thank you.
So that's...
Good names.
Yeah, I like
I
that.
like
Yeah.
Caspian.
Caspian's really strong.
Well, my daughter Ella...
Is that a little C.S. Lewis
Yes.
out there?
We call him Prince Caspian.
Okay.
and he is a prince. My daughter Ella, who's now 12, and Caspian have a very special relationship.
Okay.
And so I'm just waiting for that time when the age difference won't be a problem. And maybe we'll.
I am grooming Ella for babysitting. So.
I'm thinking marriage. You're thinking babysitting. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's good to know. That's good
No, she's looking for babysitting gigs.
Okay,
so
great.
yeah, well,
When she's
I'll
of
take a
age,
good
we will
commission.
be-
What's your age? How old does she have to be?
I don't know. How old is?
I don't know.
Noel?
15? It's 15.
I was going to
Yeah,
say 15.
we have a 16-year-old at the moment who is great.
Yeah.
So-
So I just have to get rid of them, and then
Yeah.
in 3 years,
I
Ella
mean,
will
they're
be
from
up.
church, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Phoebe. We will hear a little bit more about your story with Scarlett in our next episode, but thank you for flagging that as part of your journey. And in many ways, actually, you have been my inspiration for this episode and just walking with you through your journey and hearing how you've processed it, both on a human level, but also on a faith level. So thank you for that. Jenna.
Hi, I'm Jenna. I have a little baby Ezra. I keep forgetting their ages. So he's 3.5. Not trying to compete, but we call him King Ezra.
Oh.
And that's pretty strong.
Okay, yeah.
So we've got King Ezra, who was our first. Little bit of a surprise, not a surprise, but everything went super smoothly there. And then we've got our beautiful little Scarlett, who is 10 months old, and things were not so smooth between Ezra and Scarlett. So I guess my story will touch on miscarriages and that sort of thing. So that's where our family are at.
Thank you. Holly.
Hello, yes, I'm Holly. And we have Finlay, who is 5.5, and Stanley, who just turned 2. When I was sitting down the other day, sort of like, okay, need to prepare myself, write some notes, worked out that, our journey was about 9 years from start to having Stanley. So looking back, quite intense.
And the thing is, we were preparing for this, and we'll touch on this, is one of the questions I'm going to have for you is your journey started quite young. Because when you said it was 9 years, I'm doing the maths on you going, normally we hear this mid-30s, late 30s, early 40s, so yours has not been that story.
No.
So keen to hear a little bit more about that, so thank you. As I said, these issues or these situations are far more common than what I had thought. Ladies, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is miscarriage specifically, somewhere between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 pregnancies result in a miscarriage. I don't know if you're aware of that, but whether it links with the stories of your peers. And I guess that's my first question. We're talking about it here. Do you ladies, in inverted commas, is this something that you feel free to talk about with your friends? Because I guess stereotypically I see it on the guys' side. We don't really go there. When the ladies get together, is this something that is on the table, or is it a bit of an elephant in the room that doesn't get touched?
As in, do we speak about it unprovoked, or are we
Like-
talking about when it's happening?
Amongst your Christian friends,
Yes.
if someone has had a miscarriage, do you think they would normally share it with their friends, or do many people never share it with anybody?
I think both.
I would definitely say both.
Yeah, I think it depends on personality. Some people probably feel more okay to talk about it. Others just want to keep it private. I think it depends on how many you've had.
Yeah.
Because that gets exhausting, talking about it time and time again.
So the more you have, the less you want to talk about it.
In my experience, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, we had quite a few. And we had different types. We had a DNC, we had an ectopic.
I know ectopic is when it's happened in the fallopian tube.
Correct.
I don't know what a DNC is. I've never heard that.
So one of our pregnancies, we heard the heartbeat and then went in for our second scan to find out that the heartbeat no longer existed. And because in IVF you reach a certain point where it's unsafe for, I'm going to call it fetus, is to be inside of you anymore. And so...
For you as the mother?
Yes.
Okay.
And so then you have to undergo a process called a DNC, where they actually put you under and it's physically removed.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So much I don't know. So thank you for sharing that. Duncan, as a pastor or as a husband, What's been your experience here in terms of seeing this pop up in a church context or not pop up?
Yeah, I mean, I think you get the longer you're in a church, the more that you have these kind of conversations, and I find each one very different. You know, like there's no way of doing some kind of cookie cutter response or a process of going through grief and loss, because you know, if it's your first time and you find out this, there's a whole bunch of stuff you have to unpack there. If you've had a few kids and then suddenly you get this, that's a different experience. And so I think what we find is that, like, pastorally, you know, I kind of default to that passage that talks about rejoicing with those who rejoice and mourning with those who mourn, is that when we start to grieve, we grieve as a community to help shepherd some of that burden if we have permission to do that. And that's the other thing, is that sometimes people just don't want to talk about it because it's pretty raw and it's pretty real. And so it just, like, it's different for everyone, you know. Like, we've got experiences within our family where we've done IVF treatments in our extended family and they haven't been successful over and over again. That carries a whole bunch of grief. And so I'm just very sensitive about what I can share and what I can't share. And that gets hard, you know. And so I find that oftentimes, pastorally, the stupidest thing you can kind of do is to try and explain it. I don't think that
Theologize it.
Oh mate, that's the worst. Like, and so I think, like, learning the art of just crying with someone or seeing someone, like, if we're in the church sanctuary right now, there's a box of tissues in front of us. There's a box of tissues there. There's 2 boxes of tissues over there. There's a box of tissues over there. And if you walk through the
Shout out
place,
to our sponsors, Kleenex. Thank you for your
like, we should have taken shares, but like, that's part of the nature of what we're trying to do here, is say it's okay for you to be real and raw about your feelings. We don't have an issue with you crying, and in fact, it's probably healthy for you to express those emotions than for you to bottle them up inside. And then what kind of things can we do to kind of honour that child and that experience? You know, like, and I don't know what the theological, not ramification, but I think that there's something beautiful about the notion that when you get to heaven, you meet a child that you never got to meet here. You know, like, I think that, like, for each of you, there's this really beautiful, wonderful moment. You get to heaven and you go, oh, you're, you know, and there's this, oh, you were called to the Father's house a lot sooner than we were, and it pains me that I didn't get to live life with you, but now I get to dwell in eternity with you. That's kind of really beautiful. And so part of that process of unpacking everything is going through those stages of grief, and then also shaping a future where there is hope. Is more than anything, it's just allowing a person to grieve in their own time.
And I think that's the key word as you talk that I had underestimated, coming back to my reflections, is this is a legitimate grief.
Yeah.
And I've always said as a pastor that grief looks different for different people. The difference with, again, miscarriage specifically, which was my first entry into this broader topic, was that I didn't understand how much grief was actually associated with it.
Yeah.
I didn't realise how much emotional attachment had already been developed, and therefore the grief was much deeper than what I'd thought. Thank you for sharing that. As I said, this episode we're honing a little bit more in on the infertility side. I suppose the trajectory we're going on is from conception forwards. And so it's I suppose natural that we start with an infertility question. And as I mentioned at the start, Holly, this is something that you've experienced that our other 2 guests have not. So can you just share a little bit of what that journey has looked like, when it began, when it all kind of dawned on you? Anything you want to share about that story that you've lived with?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So as you pointed out, and thank you, I feel rather a bit older in this crowd. So it's nice to be referred to as young.
No one's older than Duncan in this room, so don't worry about it. Duncan keeps referring to he and I as 40-year-old white men, but I'm not in my 40s yet, and I refuse to be. Come September, I'm in that category, but not yet.
Okay. This old donkey will just sit over here in the corner.
So my husband, Hamish and I, we got married in 2013, and being young Christians, we wanted to experience a bit of life together. So we did that for a number of years. One thing that I had always struggled with prior to even meeting Hamish was my periods were always very irregular and very painful. So I would go, sometimes 8-9 weeks without having a period. Then I'd go 2 weeks and I'd get a new one. So very irregular and yes, very painful. There were some where I was bedridden for a week in total, really painful to get out of bed. And so this brought me to the beginning of the journey because in my mind, instinctively, I was like, there's something at play here, something going on, and I need to investigate it. So I was seeing a gynecologist at the time. I went in and asked them what they thought. I tossed whether to bring this up, but I want to be completely truthful. So that particular gynecologist at the time said to me, it's all in your head.
Whoa.
This is just you. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing at play here. You just need to move on.
How old were you at that point?
2015, gosh.
So you were already married at this point
yes,
when you got that?
Yes.
Okay.
So I was about, I can't even do the maths myself. So 22-ish,
Okay.
23.
Yep.
So that was pretty confronting. And
I'm just a bit stunned by that. Like, it's like thinking to myself, like modern medical practice is 2015. I'm like, when you said that, I thought, so that must have been in 1814. Like, we just put more leeches on you. But you're saying, no, like we had electricity and cars.
I did say I was old.
Yeah.
You must moisturise really well.
Like sweet.
Hold these 231
Like, is
years
that guy
old.
coming back in time in a DeLorean? Like,
Wow.
sorry.
No. So, yes, I must have mentioned this to my mum in passing, and she said to me, this is not an okay response, and she validated me, which was probably the most important and crucial step in the whole of our journey, because if I'd never received that validation, I don't think I would have ever gone on to get a second opinion. And so my parents were at a different church. My mum was very good friends with a gynecologist there and ran past him what had happened. And he said, look, I'm really good friends with this lady who specialises in women's, infertility and things like that. She said, and he said, I think your daughter should go and see him. See her. So I went off to see her, and at the time I actually had my second cyst. So she said, look, you're going to have to go under to have this removed anyway. She said, from my story, I highly suspect that you have endometriosis. But unfortunately, and I believe still to this date, it's an elective surgery. And so this meant that we had to choose and then, fork up the...
Pay for it, yeah.
Yeah.
But how much is that? I don't know.
For
that surgery?
Laparoscopic surgery.
Yeah.
Oh, I think at the time when we did it, which was 2015, I'm going to say around about the $8,000 mark.
$8,000?
Yeah.
So
look, we
you did do it?
We did.
Okay.
We did. I myself had, rightly or wrongly, done a little bit of Dr. Google myself.
We've all been there, Holly. Don't you worry.
That's good.
So I went in to have the cyst removed and have laparoscopic surgery, and I actually had stage 4 endometriosis, which is the most crucial stage that you can, or severe.
And to a layman like me, what is endometriosis? I don't even know if I said it right.
Yes.
I've heard the
I
name.
only learned about this like yesterday. Can I have a crack at explaining?
Sure,
Oh,
And
please.
then you can tell me if I'm
Endometriosis for
wrong.
dummies. Because I have no idea. I've heard the name. I have
Yeah.
no idea what it is.
So endometriosis is that when you have a period, the lining on the inside of your uterus comes away. With endometriosis, you actually grow a lining on the outside of your uterus as well that also sheds at the same time. Now, bear in mind the stuff on the inside of your uterus can come out, but the stuff on the outside of your uterus cause a whole bunch of internal issues.
It doesn't come out.
Yeah, so it doesn't come out, and you've got to deal with like internal bleeding essentially, which is one of the reasons why I'm in a fight gym, so I know that when you get tagged and your internal organs start to bleed internally, it's bad.
Sure.
And it's really painful. Well, you have that with your womb regularly, basically. Is that a fair kind of
Yeah.
explanation of what it is?
Yes, definitely.
And the stage 4 part for you was that what was happening on the outside of your uterus was particularly acute.
Correct. So there's normally 1 to 4. So 1 is fairly, uterus contained, whereas 4, it's gone well beyond, like Duncan said, and it's actually affecting other organs
Wow.
like bowel and those that are close by to
So
your
it
uterus.
wasn't just in your head.
No.
Mm.
No.
Wow.
So, and then once we discovered that I had stage 4 endometriosis, the specialist at the time, she said, not always the case, but it is highly possible that you will struggle with infertility.
Mhm.
So this then started us on the path that we then followed.
Hence why it started younger than what the statistics might say for
Yes.
you guys.
Yes.
Yeah.
And look, definitely a choice that we made. But yeah, each has to, make their own.
Sure.
So how old were you when you started IVF?
So yes, it was, 2015-ish.
Yeah.
So about 22, 23.
Wow.
And we then were referred to IVF Australia from this specialist, where we met our doctor there. And they said they did a number of tests and said to us, we can't determine, obviously I had endo, but other than that, they couldn't determine otherwise why we were struggling. And so we were told, look, try for 6 months, naturally see how things go, and then we will go from there. So we tried for 6 months and had no success. And then that is when we decided to well and truly get involved in the IVF process. And so then at the beginning, hundreds and hundreds of needles because, and
Literally?
yes,
Wow.
I actually have a severe needle phobia.
Even before that? Or
Yes.
because of that?
No,
Before
even
that?
before,
Oh my
even
goodness.
before. Yes, it was very, very difficult. I would often embarrassingly scream in the rooms, and they'd have to sort of like pin me down to administer the tests. And then
Just in fairness, I scream still. Don't feel bad about that. I had a vasectomy in the chair, and I hadn't sucked the green whistle enough. And so when they stuck a needle in me, I yelped. And he said, just suck harder on that green whistle. So don't feel bad about the fact that you know.
I'm the guy that has to tick prone to fainting on the medical intake form.
yes.
No, literally. Because vasectomy, when I had mine, I didn't. I passed out when I came to, and the nurse got me in loads of trouble because it's like, have this ever happened to you before? I was like, yeah, but I didn't want to make a big deal of it. It's like, you idiot, you got to tick the box. So there you go. No judgment here. You're amongst friends.
Yeah. So the first stage is ovulation tracking. So you are given some drugs to stimulate your follicles, and then you go in every second day to be blood tested, see how your levels are panning out. And and then
Which is a needle for drugs and then a needle to test every single day, is what you're saying.
Every second day.
Every second.
And this is what IVF looks like for everybody? Or was this unique to your
Look,
situation?
I probably should have prefaced the conversation by saying every person's journey is different.
Yeah.
Ours isn't, as you said, Duncan, like cookie cutter. Ours isn't, the one way that it will occur. Everyone will be different depending on what's going on for you.
Yeah.
Sorry, when you're going in, you're like leaving work to have to go somewhere.
Well, it's interesting. So they tend to do the blood test first thing in the morning, 7 a.m. So our particular clinic was in Greenwich. You could park downstairs and then there was a lift to go upstairs, but the lift wouldn't actually work until 7 a.m. on the dot. So there we were, all these women parking, lining up at this lift in the basement because we were all wanting to get in, get to work.
Yeah.
It's like fertility Centrelink.
Yes.
It's like the line at, wow.
Gosh, because you got stuff to do.
Yes.
You got it.
And this is every second day.
This is every second
Wow.
day.
Did you make friends with the women? Hi, Julie.
Shout out to Julie. Thanks for listening.
Look, you did get to see familiar faces, but it's a difficult process, and first thing in the morning I'm not great unless I've had a coffee or two, so and I just had running in the back of my mind needle. So yes, ovulation tracking. This all then leads to the actual egg retrieval. So once you're getting toward the end of the process, they then give you a needle which is called the trigger. So the nurses will say...
Sounds ominous.
Your levels are at the optimum level. We now want you to administer the trigger at a particular time on a particular day. You give this to yourself, and then 2 days later you go in for what they call the egg retrieval process, where you can pick whether you want to or not. I chose to go under. I don't want to know what's happening during that. So I was put under, and they then go in and retrieve however many eggs that you have managed to grow in that time.
So this starts to touch on the part of this conversation that I have heard about in Christian circles, which is around the ethics of the egg harvesting and the obligation that some Christians feel about fertilizing all of those eggs. We start getting into a beginning of life conversation, and when does that begin and when does it end?
Christians will pick a fight about anything. Just really want to have a fight about something. You're like, let me just be pissed about the notion of not all those eggs getting...
But
Are you legitimately saying that?
Well, I will push back on you a little bit and say, in my experience, this could be wrong. Holly, I want to ask you about this. When I say the handful, I would say probably 4 or 5 sets of friends that I know who've gone through this. I think, I'm not prescribing, this is what everyone has to decide, but I think of all those 4 or 5 who were Christians, every one of them felt a moral obligation to fertilize every single one of those eggs, because that was now a life. Now, I'm not saying that's right or that's wrong. I'm just saying in my experience, my Christian friends, that seems to have been a universal theological conclusion that they had made, that this was now an image bearer of God, and therefore they felt a moral duty, even if that was 8, and they were going to have 8 kids. That's the decision that they were going to have to make at that point.
Even before the sperm's involved?
I don't know. Yes, that's fair. I don't know at what point did that moral decision... Is it that you, and I want to ask Holly, like, how many eggs do you normally get out of this process?
And then a man kind of like a fish fertilizes over the top of it. Is that? I mean,
that's exactly what happens. Yeah.
It's very clinical.
Do you understand what I'm talking about?
I do. So we, as I mentioned, we started when we were very young, and we didn't know anyone else close that had been through this process. So we had no one to turn to say, what's the right or wrong thing to do here? Ethically.
Yeah.
And I cannot safely say at the time, I'm sure he did, but I cannot remember if our doctor said to us, you actually have the choice of how many of these eggs that you want to fertilise, because that is a decision that you can make.
So there's two steps here. There's the bringing out the eggs.
Yep, the retrieval.
Thank you, the retrieval. And normally, how many get retrieved?
So we were very fortunate. There will be many people here who won't have had the same result as us. And I want to say, I cannot imagine going through the process several times. For us, we had 19 taken out.
And where does that rank on? Is there an average?
Very good.
Okay.
There isn't necessarily an average, but so I would say we were very fortunate though, because I've heard of many stories where people only have 1, 2, or even none.
Okay.
So 19, I would say, is quite high.
And I'm assuming you don't want to have 19 children at this point.
No.
There's not a big one. Here, carnivals don't come in that size. Not even
Stretch
in a
carnival.
Like
Let's
you're in
do
a
it.
full-size commercial coastline for a situation like that.
In saying that,
So at that point, because there's grades, is that
yes,
correct?
correct.
And they tell you?
Yes, so this is...
So that's an A+, right? 19 eggs.
Yes. So, well...
Or grades
we
of
had
eggs within the 19.
Grades of eggs.
Within that
It's
19,
graded.
there's some better than others in inverted commas.
Correct.
Okay.
So we had 19 retrieved. They then go through the insemination process or fertilization,
And you
where they...
sorry.
No, sorry.
And you choose how many of those 19 get.
You can. We didn't know. So we didn't ever say we don't want all fertilized.
Okay.
So, but I will touch on something that then later on. So we had all 19 then taken to the next step, which is fertilization. And then from there, they will start the process of grading them. And it's 5 days that they will study the eggs and see if they make, the next step or not into what then becomes the embryo.
Okay.
So we dropped from 19 down to 13. That made, made it to day 3, and then down from 13 to 10. That were actual viable graded embryos.
Can I ask you now at this point, as we bring in the emotional side of this journey, when you went from 19 down to 10, were you grieving at that? But it was grief of feeling that do you know what I mean? Like
Yes.
like coming back to my initial question of underestimating the grief of the loss of these kinds of processes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, as I said, we were very fortunate to get 19 at the beginning, but for us, and as you touched on a bit, Chris, we saw each of those as potential life.
Yeah.
We'd really, at this stage, wanted children. We'd always seen our life as having children. So for our chances to drop that much already at the beginning of the process before even, then putting them in, that was quite hard.
Okay.
So from there, we then had our first fresh transfer. So there is a frozen transfer and then a fresh transfer. So at the end of the 5 days, they said to us, look, you are viable for a fresh transfer, which means we're not going to freeze this particular egg, we're going to put it into you straight away.
The other 9 go in the freezer.
The other 9 go in the freezer. So a couple of weeks later, we had our first fresh transfer, and we then went for our first scan, and we had a heartbeat.
Amazing.
Amazing.
Can I just say that the doctors really need to figure out how to name these things better? 'Cause I can't tell if I'm talking about commercial fisheries or pregnant. Do you know what I mean?
I think retrieval is pretty...
We're going to freeze some, so we'll have a fresh catch and we'll have a frozen catch. I mean, it just, do you know, like...
I do know.
Retrieval just sounds kind of like, can we not give some love and some compassion to what we're doing, But I think this is part of the challenge, isn't it? Is that it is very clinical. Like, I mean, the fact that there's like a joy in when you figure out, you find out you're pregnant, like you go up, you get a test, you come home, you surprise your husband. That kind of experience is part of some people's narrative for having children, and yours is kind of a doctor saying, all right, we've got a fresh one ready to go, we're popping it in you, and you're pregnant now, hopefully, right? And it's like, okay, well, that's...
It's a different
experience,
sure.
Isn't it? So...
Naively at the beginning, this was our first one, and we just thought, great, we're pregnant, so exciting. We told our...
No more needles.
No more needles, thank goodness. We told our friends, and it was the best news we had ever received. And then we went for the 12-week scan with our obstetrician, lying on the bed, scanning. It was my our obstetrician is one of my really good friends' dads. He looked at me and I was like, there's been a bit of a pause, perhaps longer than I'd anticipated, and he turned to us and he said, I'm so sorry, there is no longer a heartbeat. So that was our first miscarriage. With IVF, in between each transfer, they do recommend that you wait a little bit. Sounds, as you said, clinical, but reset the system. Let everything clear out. And then we were going on a trip overseas, and we spoke to our IVF doctor, and he said, look, it might be a really good opportunity for you guys to do another one. You're ready, your body's ready. We could try one of the first frozen embryos that you have. So we did. We then went on our trip. We started in 2015, and then, I'm trying to think. It was then that same year we went, 2 months later, and did our next transfer, went on our trip, and I then had a second miscarriage.
On the trip.
And do you know how many weeks you were that time?
Very early on then. It was more like a natural period, I'd say.
Okay.
I forgot to say with the first one, we didn't know, but I actually ended up in emergency because for that one, I think I was around about, the 12-week mark, but then it didn't pass naturally. So it then got around to 15 or so week mark and ended up in emergency on morphine in a room by myself, and then passed that fetus in the bathroom. It was, a really difficult miscarriage.
Can I pause you in this step of your journey and just ask you, do you remember having any feeling, you're a Christian, do you remember having any feelings towards God or theological things? And it's all right if there wasn't. I'm just curious, at this stage you've now had 2 miscarriages. The journey has, let's just underspeak it, it's been difficult for you. Where did your faith come in or not come in at this point?
I think that you start to question why. As a woman, you're told you're designed to grow babies. And I would like to have considered that before all of this I had a fairly strong faith, and hopefully I do today, but there were definitely points in time, particularly following our D&C and ectopic, where I just said, why? Why are you putting me through this? Why so many times? So Finlay was attempt number 3, and
so Finlay is now your eldest son.
Yes, he's 5.5, and then Stanley also took another 4.
Wow.
Transfers.
Wow.
Yeah. So
you've used 7 of the 10.
We have,
Wow.
yes. And as I said, we just...
Sorry, can I ask, of the 4 between Finlay and Stanley, were they not fertilised, or did you have miscarriages again each time?
Yes, no, I had miscarriages, or during that, so between Finlay and Stanley is when we had our D&C and an ectopic pregnancy. And the ectopic one was one that was particularly hard to process, because when you go through IVF, they use glue to actually implant the embryo into your uterus. So then ectopic means that the embryo has actually travelled up into a fallopian tube, which when you think about it, and it's coming from your follicles, you can understand how it may occur then, because the egg has to actually travel down the fallopian tube to get into your uterus. With IVF, they're going straight into your uterus, sticking it to the wall to implant. It's 0.05% chance of having an ectopic pregnancy during IVF.
Wow.
Okay.
So it was at that point that Hamish and I were really just like, we felt tested.
Fiddlesticks.
Quite tested.
Did you say fiddlesticks? Yes.
It's Christian podcast.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Chocolate fudge brownies.
Sure.
And I remember thinking, why? Why are you testing me in this way, God?
So it's not that God wasn't there, you were starting to test his character.
Correct.
Okay.
Which, in hindsight's a beautiful thing, not great. But I was not in a great place.
But you also join in the company of many biblical heroes who have also asked the same question. So I would say to you pastorally that asking why is not an unholy thing to do.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
You're too kind. Yeah, no, at the time I felt very bad for feeling, well, looking back, I feel bad for feeling that way. But for something that's meant to just supposedly happen, and it time and time again wasn't, even with medical intervention, it's hard to wrap your head around.
Can I just speak a word into your life for a moment? And I've said this in sermons before, but my mentor taught me this once, that doubt feels threatening to our faith. And in this point, doubting God's character sounds like one of the things that was going on for you. Doubt actually shows that you still care about the relationship that you have. And doubt is not actually the opposite of faith. Apathy is the opposite of faith. It's when you've given up caring about your relationship with God, dismissing him completely, flipping the bird to him, whatever that looks like. But wrestling with God is actually evidence that the Holy Spirit is working within you, that you even care about that relationship in the first place. So I just want to say that to you. And I want to say that to anyone listening, that if you can come through a season of doubt or crisis, or however you want to put it, and you actually are willing to step into that journey, that's actually not evidence of non-faith. I think it's actually evidence of faith. So I just want to say that to you.
I think that is super helpful, because we didn't have anyone that we could turn to. So we felt very alone and isolated throughout the process. We really only had one another, and mentally, physically, spiritually, we were drained. Whilst I asked Hamish, and I said to him, how did you feel throughout the process? And he said, well, I definitely felt mentally and spiritually challenged, but he said, obviously, I wasn't going through it physically like you were. But for him, it was challenging watching me be so affected, and then that affected our marriage.
Of course.
So, yes. But, so third attempt, we had another frozen transfer, and we now have our glorious, feisty 5.5-year-old in there.
A great kid.
Yes, so he was born 2018. And something that was difficult during that particular pregnancy, though, was not doubting every scan. Once you've experienced loss at the level that we had, at the different stages that we had. It was hard not to go in every scan with trepidation. You know, it was difficult because I wanted to be happy during that pregnancy. I wanted to feel all the feels. I wanted to, you know, but I couldn't ever really safely say that I felt at peace during that pregnancy, because I was at some stage expecting to turn around and be told, sorry, hasn't worked, hasn't gone. We were very fortunate. Finlay was okay, and with IVF, they do say once you hit 40 weeks, they don't like you to go over 40 weeks. Okay. So, and Finlay at 38 weeks decided to flip. So his head was then poking up again, not ideal for a vaginal birth. So we then were booked in for a cesarean, and he was born August 2018. Yeah.
So, first of all, thank you. That is a serious journey that you've been on, and I've known a little bit of it, but not all of it. And the two other mums in the room are shaking their head at a lot of it and nodding. And so, man, that's a lot. Is the first thing I want to say. And thank you for sharing it. Coming back to this ethical conversation, if I'm doing the maths here, you've got 3 eggs left. What's your take on this? And I can I say to all our listeners, before you think I'm insensitive, I did ask Holly for permission to go here before we recorded, so I do have permission to go here. What is your take on? So the argument is, once an egg is fertilized, it is now a life, and as Christians, we should have a high view of life, and therefore we have a moral responsibility to see whether those fertilized eggs are viable. Now, I've heard of some Christians donating their eggs to other people to carry. It's got a name, I've forgotten the name of it, but that's a thing.
Surrogacy?
Yeah, it's a specific kind of surrogacy though that has a name. So if you've got another lady who is unable to conceive and you've got too many fertilized eggs, you might donate your fertilized egg to another person to carry and be their child. But genetically, they are 100% your child still.
Wow.
So that's one option that people go down. Another option is they feel the moral obligation to do them all, even if that's really inconvenient. So in Holly's situation, she's staring down the barrel of having 5 children. The other, which she's laughing at. The other option is you just don't do anything, you just let them go. Or the other option, which I've heard, is that you fertilize them. That's not the right way. You implant all of them at once, knowing that probably only one of them is going to take, but you also, in inverted commas, run the risk of also having triplets. So these are the things that I've seen people, and specifically within Christendom, and I'm going to stereotype, and I know it's not completely true, but for people not of faith, I think we're just not going to go further with them is probably a more common avenue that Christians, right or wrong, don't feel like they have at their disposal. So Holly, you're now in this conundrum. Where are you at with that?
So as I said earlier, it took 3 attempts for Finlay and for our other son Stanley, who was born February 2022. We're not completely closed off to trying to have more children, but for me, I definitely have to be in a particular frame of mind to start the process again. And physically, I feel like I also need to be at a certain point to put my body through that process again. So you're right. By what you said before, those are some of the options you have. You also can donate your eggs to science.
Okay.
So if we decide with those 3, no, we do not wish to continue anymore, we could say we're donating them to IVF Australia so that they can do further studies into the IVF process, or you can actually terminate them too.
Okay.
choose not to put them back into yourself. But that is a particular one that we wrestle with because we do feel like those are potential lives. Stanley is a frozen transfer. He was in the fridge for about 2.5, 3 years.
In the fridge.
How does he go with cobwebs?
Actually, he prefers cold. So,
And can I bring up Stanley at this point?
Yes.
So the other complication, that's not the right word. The other factor at play here for Holly and Hamish is that Stanley has cerebral palsy. So I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, this has been a very arduous journey as parents. You are, can I say, amazing parents, seeing you parent your son and your sons. But in terms of an emotional, physical capacity, that's just another variable in your story that makes this non-textbook.
Yeah, definitely. I was having a chat with my mum the other day. Because I mentioned I was coming on this podcast. And I said, they want to chat about ethics, Mum. And I said, we're very fortunate. We have 3 left over. But with Stanley and his disability, life to date has been extremely challenging.
Yep.
And Hamish and I, we both come from families of 3. We always thought that we would have 3 children. So, as I said, we're not opposed to necessarily having a 3rd, but we have faced extreme challenges with falling pregnant. And then Stanley, at this point in time, he's still not walking. So physically, that is a daily toll on me. I work 3 days a week, and then I take Stanley on a Thursday and Friday to therapy. So right now, in this point in time, I do not want to detriment his life, his development, his journey. And so there are times when I feel guilty to the point where I'm like, no, we can't introduce another child at this stage. But in saying that, we're not necessarily closed book. Yeah, it's hard to. You asked me before, is there, because you can do genetic testing with IVF. So at the beginning, you can say we'd like for our embryos to be tested to see if there are any medical conditions. We chose not to because we always believed, regardless of whether our children had a disability or not, we would have them and we would love them, and this would never change our mind. But yes, no, now having Stanley, and we just really want to make sure that he has the best chance in life. But I do wrestle with, we still really feel a pull for potentially having a 3rd.
And you feel, as what I'm hearing from you, is you feel as though those 3 remaining fertilized eggs that are in the fridge, as you say, they are lives at this point. As a Christian, you that's your moral conclusion that you guys have made.
Yeah, definitely. We had different stages of when we miscarried. So for many of them, there was a heartbeat. That was a life for us. If we had told them at the beginning, no, we only want...
This is the other part of your story, that they didn't and you were so young that you didn't know that, as you were telling that part of your story early on, I was like, these things that I've learned at age 40 from you were so young that you hadn't even thought about this stuff because you hadn't had to. And as you say, none of your peers were talking about it because they weren't living that either.
Correct. So whilst I can appreciate others turning around and saying, no, we'd only like 4 of those eggs to be fertilized or 5. I don't know whether it was God's work at play. I like to think it was. But we chose to have them all. And if we hadn't, then, it took 3 attempts to have Finlay and another 4 to have Stanley.
Yep.
If we'd chosen, let's only do 3, that would mean we only had Finlay. I cannot imagine our lives without Stanley.
Question. Sorry, guys. Just quickly. Well, the ones in the fridge, is there an expiry on them?
No, but you do have to pay for 6 monthly refrigeration.
Right. Do they get a lesser grade as you
No,
as you go on?
no.
They-
So when
they're
they're
just-
frozen, their grade sticks. They are continuously that grade for their duration during that.
So you could do it in like 10 years' time.
Yeah,
Wow.
definitely.
I've got friends that their children who are technically the same age because they were frozen at the same time are like 8 years apart, and they can kind of laugh at it that the 8-year-old younger is technically the same. As we begin to wrap up, Holly, and I just want to say thank you so much for sharing this, and it's, I mean, our hope in doing these episodes that it, you know, it's such a stereotype, but for the other Hollies out there, that your courage can normalize the journey for other people. What would you say to people who are, even though, as you say, every journey is different, you've had a particularly nuanced one, but for those who have Christians who are having fertility issues, what advice would you give to them who are listening?
Yeah. Early on, we had another couple come up to us and say, if it was God's design for you guys to have children, then He would have made it be so.
Did you slap them?
I was very tempted to.
Yeah.
Because the other iteration of that I've heard is there's so many children around the world who need to be adopted. Why don't you just take one of them? That's the other one
From
that I've
Australia
heard.
with the strictest adoption.
Yeah, I know,
Yeah.
right? That's the
Well,
problem.
so,
I know.
Yeah. Hamish and I, we chatted about this. We always had a very, very clear line of communication, particularly between ourselves. We would not have got through the process without one another. As I said, for me, physically, it was a lot more demanding than it was for him. But also having friends and family around you that can be praying for you. The power of prayer is so important through a process like this. And we probably weren't very open with others at the beginning of the process. We learned to open up as we went along, which I think, had I known how much better it was to be open about it and have others grieve with you and be able to support you, then I would have done so more earlier in our journey. So yes, definitely finding your community to surround you, love you, pray for you, and support you, because it's very difficult to go through the process, have a miscarriage, and then only bring it up.
Yeah.
Whereas it does take the surprise element out of it, which, you know, is difficult for some, but being able to have someone throughout the entire process was so important toward the end there.
And the flip side, this is my last question, for those of us who are trying to support, be the kind of communities that Duncan spoke about earlier, like, how do we not say the worst possible? Like, what are those things that people have said, maybe they mean well, but it's just the worst?
Oh, like just relax and it will happen.
I'll
Or
note that one down. Okay, don't do that.
yes, or, you know, it will be when it will be.
Yeah.
No, all those great classics.
Yeah. What about just remember God is in control line?
Oh, yes.
I'm assuming that's unhelpful.
Yes.
Or maybe it's not.
Oh, no, look, it's helpful, and I don't want to say He's not in control, because He is in control of our lives. But at the time when you're grieving or you've just been through a miscarriage or an ectopic, the last thing you want to be told is that particular line.
You come back to the just sitting with the person wisdom.
Yeah. Sometimes they just want to have a shoulder to cry.
Yeah.
They want to grieve. They don't want to have every, hopeful passage thrown their way.
And this is a whole different episode, which we won't do this time, but might have to have Hamish on. I'm looking at Duncan here. Like, the other thing as I think about this is, like, where do the dudes go as well?
Yes.
Because, you know, I don't think of any of the journeys that I'm now aware of the conversation has been instigated by the husband. So the whole male support and how's a man meant to think when he's seeing his wife suffer so much physically, where's the legitimacy of his grief in all of that, knowing that he is one step removed to a degree, and yet he's also processing his own journey. So that's a whole nother part of this conversation that we won't get time for. But again, I just want to say thank you so much. Like it's quite a story you've got, and again, I don't want to call you a hero. That's bandied around too much, but you have shown a lot of courage for sharing it, and I hope that it blesses many people. So thank you for that service that you've given us.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Holly. We're going to wrap it up just there for this episode. Next couple of episodes, we'll unpack some more stories. Team, if you do have any questions or comments for the Dead Elephants, you can leave that on our Discord channel, especially as it relates to this. If you have any insights or thoughts or responses on any of it, the thing I would say is keep it positive.
On the Discord.
On the Discord channel. And looking forward to next week's conversation as we keep on talking about this. We'll see you again next week.
See you next week.